Welcome to episode 459 of the Thunder Underground podcast. Trent here as always. This week's going to be fun because Jason Wood, my former co-host of this podcast, is back once again. And we're going to look into Def Leppard's album Slang. 30-year anniversary. If you're listening to this podcast, the day it drops, May 13th. This album came out on this date in 1996. If you're listening to this in the future because you like Def Leppard or Slang, thanks for showing up. We're going to take a look at all the tracks on Def Leppard's most off-brand album, I guess you could say, as far as the Def Leppard style, the Def Leppard sound. An album or two after this that, they tried other avenues, but they kind of went back to the formula of what we know from Def Leppard. The big, bombastic, melodic rock, the hard rock, with that pop sensibility and those giant choruses, those huge harmonies, that great 80s hard rock and roll guitar work, all the great stuff that Def Leppard is known for, that they've continued to this day. But of course, there was that brief period in the 90s where bands of this ilk were trying different things because the mainstream, had changed very drastically and kind of shunned most of those bands. Def Leppard was big enough to, kind of tread water through that moment, like we're going to talk about. The album still ended up going gold, whereas most bands that were popular in that 80s era with Def Leppard were not even having gold albums during that time. The exception would be Bon Jovi or Motley Crue. The bands that were already, that were at that upper echelon of headlining arenas and all that great stuff. Tesla also kind of, managed their way through it. Still had platinum albums in the mid-90s. But, most bands did not. And Def Leppard, tried something and some of it worked, some of it didn't. But overall, it's kind of it's a fun album to look back on because it very much stands in that place in time. If you were around, especially while it was happening, you can hear the sounds that kind of what they were going for in that 90s sound with this. But if you're, younger or newer to Def Leppard or, missed this when it came out, give it a listen. It'll probably shock you a little bit if you listen to Pyromania or Hysteria, or especially the early Def Leppard before that, and then listen to Slang. It's obviously totally different. But again, we're going to get into all that in here shortly with Jason. But first, I need to let you know who sponsors this podcast. Sunset Tattoo is a tattoo shop located in Midtown Tulsa. Their tattoos are done good and proper. They're state licensed, Native American owned, and they have a female artist on staff full time. They accept walk-ins. You can also set up a time to go in there and talk about what work you're looking to have done. They've got tons of photos on their social medias you can check out to see that they specialize in all different kinds of styles. Sunset Tattoo Tulsa on both Instagram and Facebook. I've had multiple tattoos done by Jake at Sunset Tattoo that I'm very happy with. I know many others that have as well. And in fact, there's probably been some members of a band you love that have as well. Jake has tattooed many members of some well-known rock, hard rock, heavy metal bands throughout the years as well. His shop is dedicated in celebrating the world of hard rock and heavy metal, kind of like we do here at Thunder Underground. So it's a good partnership. Very happy to have Sunset Tattoo going strong after all these years. Appreciate their support. Get in there and tell them you heard about them right here on Thunder Underground. We've also got DEB Concerts, our longest running sponsor, concert promoter based in the Tulsa area that has brought tons of great acts to the downtown area of Tulsa, such as Megadeth, Lamb of God, Saxon, Last in Line, Buck Cherry, Snoop Dogg, Ice Cube, Great White, LA Guns, Steelheart. The list is massive and long, and it's ever growing. DEB Concerts books the Roadhouse DEB concert stage at Rocklahoma every year. That also includes the pre-party, which is included with your 3-day ticket. This year at Rocklahoma, you can check out rocklahoma.com for the full lineup, which features headliners like Slayer, Godsmack, and Papa Roach. But the DEB concert stage specifically will feature Plush, She Hates Me Not, a Van Halen tribute called Jump, 7 Foot Monkey, an Ozzy tribute called Ozzolution, Molly Hatchet, Slaughter. Hey, Mark Slaughter has been on this podcast twice, and the almighty Ugly Kid Joe. One of my favorite vocalists of all time, Whitfield Crane. One of the most underrated bands ever, for their first time at Rocklahoma here on the 20th anniversary. Super excited to be able to see Ugly Kid Joe once again. If you haven't, you're in for a treat. DEB Concerts. Hit him up at debconcerts.com to be kept up to date. And of course, we keep you up to date right here. And speaking of Rocklahoma, the Rocklahoma Bitches are back as a sponsor leading up to Rocklahoma 2026 once again. They've been an institution at Rocklahoma dating back to 2011, 15 plus years now. Almost the full 20 years. I've personally been fortunate enough to make it to every Rocklahoma since 2007. I'll be out there once again this year in 2026 along with the Rocklahoma Bitches. Christy and Kendra are very supportive of the community of Rocklahoma. That's what they're out there. They're always out there hosting events at the parties that go on in the campgrounds. They've got tons of merch for Rocklahoma Bitches. T-shirts, koozies, bags, stickers. They have new stuff every single time I see them, and they will give you all this stuff at Rocklahoma for absolutely free. They don't charge for a single piece of their merch. They're always flying around the campgrounds, passing out this stuff to support Rocklahoma and support their love of the festival-going experience. They're very charitable besides just their merch. Christy always bids on the autographed guitars the Rocklahoma auctions off every year for charity, and she usually walks away with one. Rocklahoma Bitches also sponsors the Cancer Sucks benefit that happens in Tulsa every year at the end of November to, of course, raise money for cancer. That happens at the Canes Ballroom. Rocklahoma Bitches, super excited to have them back, partnered with Thunder Underground, leading up to Rocklahoma once again. All right, so back to the subject at hand, being Def Leppard. This album, like I said, came out in 96. This was the first album to feature Vivian Campbell on record. Vivian Campbell had been in the band at least 5 years by this point. And of course, he replaced Steve Clark, who unfortunately passed away in 1990. They had 2 albums previous to this whenever Vivian Campbell was a part of the band, but Adrenalize was already being made while Steve Clark was still alive and written and all that great stuff. And Phil Collen recorded all the guitar parts on that album. And then Retroactive, which came out a couple years later, was a lot of B-sides, and had a couple, newer songs, but again, they were songs done around the same time as that Adrenalize session, so it was all done by Phil Collen. And Vivian Campbell was actually on this podcast many years ago, episode 226. If you're good with math, that's almost exactly half this podcast to go, episode-wise, because we're now at 459, like I mentioned up front, and that would be 452, would be double 226, right? It's been a hot minute, but I bring that up. Well, obviously I bring it up because if you're listening to this and you're a Def Leppard fan, I would love if you go check out that episode among many others. But on that episode, one of the questions I asked Vivian Campbell was about Slang. And he gave a good response. So hop on the socials right now, whether you're listening to this, whatever day you're listening to this, because I'm posting a clip of Vivian Campbell talking about Slang from that episode many years ago on this podcast for the anniversary. So there you go. There's, this podcast tie into both Def Leppard and the album Slang as a whole. But we're going to obviously get into, way more about this with Jason here shortly. I don't need to dive too far into this. If you're a regular listener of this podcast, you know that Jason was here just last week, and we did this exact same thing for the 30th anniversary of Pantera, The Great Southern Trendkill. It came out 30 years and 1 week ago, May 7th, 1996. And this was a time period for me where I was just a massive fan of both those bands. I mean, I still am. Those things never really died with me, as they do with a lot of music geeks. You, of course, expand and adapt into what you like throughout the years as the years go on, but if you're passionate about something, usually the early stuff sticks with you. I probably wouldn't be doing a podcast for 11 years if I wasn't diehard about all these bands I loved throughout my youth. And Pantera and Def Leppard are obviously 2 wildly different bands. Hey, why can't we be huge fans of both? Some people can't manage that, But for those of you that can, check out that Pantera episode as well. Throughout the years of this podcast, I've been fortunate enough to have on many other artists from this heyday of, Def Leppard's heyday of the 80s into the early 90s. Members of bands like, very recently, Mark Kendall of Great White was on for a third time a couple months ago. Frank Hannon of Tesla was on for the fifth time a few months ago. Robin McCauley of Michael Schenker Group was also on for the fifth time earlier this year. We've also had on throughout the years Dee Snider, Jeff Tate, the original voice of Queensryche, Tracy Guns of LA Guns, Phil Lewis a couple times of LA Guns, members of Firehouse, Warrant, Motley Crue, Whitesnake, Bon Jovi, and so many others. So dig back, through that stuff, because I imagine if you're a fan of Def Leppard, you're a fan of at least a couple of those bands I just mentioned. I'm not going to talk too much here. We've got some talking to do about this album with Def Leppard, and I'll come back to give you a few more thoughts afterwards. But here's Jason returning to the podcast once again to help me break down Def Leppard's 1996 album, Slang. So Def Leppard's Slang was the sixth album from Def Leppard. Came out on May 13th in 1996. This album actually, I looked it up, this album actually debuted at number 14, which was higher than I expected, but I guess, that it's it probably debuted at that, based off of the band's name,
Right.
Because that would always hold weight, even in a downtime, they were up that upper echelon, like, Bon Jovi or something, where like even in a downturn, they still had success.
Right.
The album ended up going gold. And it was the first Def Leppard album that wasn't platinum or a billion times platinum. It's not the first. That's, the one thing I wanted to point out here off the top is that, this album always gets thrown out there as the stark kind of contrast as it is, but it also is not the first time that Def Leppard changed their sound. Because their first two albums, I mean, obviously it's a starker difference, different territory, but they shifted from that early, raw new wave of British heavy metal sound into, of course, what they became with Mutt Lange and Pyromania and Hysteria and everything.
Absolutely. What I was going to say was, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but, you had these bands that were huge in the early 90s, like 90 to 92.
Yeah.
Metallica, Pantera, Def Leppard, whatever. There's more. And once the whole thing hit, the whole alternative thing hit in 93, 94. So all these huge dinosaur bands, like, they've got to figure out what to do now. Like, do we just keep doing what we do? Do we change? What do we do? Do we stay relevant? Or we just stay classic and bet on that? And every band did that. I don't care if you were Exodus or Def Leppard. You did that.
Yeah.
This was Def Leppard's like, okay, let's see where this goes. I mean, I get it. You're a giant dinosaur band and you've got to figure it out. And it didn't work for me. Back in the day, I thought, okay, well, I get it maybe. But when I listen to it now, I'm like, no, this didn't work. And when you see where they went since then, they really didn't need to do this record.
Yeah.
For me, yeah, I mean, there was a few things there that was cool, but for the most part, this album was just a throwaway for me, like totally a throwaway.
Did you feel that? I was going to ask you, did you feel that way, though, when you first heard it 30 years ago, or did you...
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, when I first heard it, I'm like, okay, I get it.
Okay.
This is maybe what they need to do. But knowing now where they went and after that and what they've done, no, they didn't need to do that. And it wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah.
It really wouldn't have.
I think if they had put out an album that sounded like what classic Def Leppard, that it probably would have went platinum, even if they
Oh,
wouldn't have, even if
absolutely.
it didn't chart
Because
higher than
you've got,
14.
because I'm going to tell you, dude, because I'm going to my notes right now. Because you've got a couple songs, I can't remember exactly their title right now, but you've got a couple songs in that record where had they just did what they did, they might have been hits.
Oh yeah,
Or if they just saved those for a few years later, they might have been hits. I don't know.
yeah. There's kind of two schools on thought of thought on this. It's like, do you think? I mean, we don't know. It's would be speculation unless they've said in interviews. It's like, is this what Joe Elliott and Phil Campbell like wanted to do, or is this like what the record label kind of said? Hey, kind of go this route.
Right. And see, that's what I don't know, and that's what we won't ever know. And if you interviewed those motherfuckers right now, they would never give you the goddamn straight answer.
Right.
They never would. So you don't know. You really don't know.
Yeah.
So it's just up to us as dorky podcast nerds to just talk about it.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of that, years ago, Vivian Campbell was on this podcast, and I remember I did ask him about this album, and I can't remember specifically what his thoughts on it were, but like I remember they were good thoughts, but this is also the first album that Vivian Campbell played on, even though he had been in the band two albums previous, because Phil Collin did the full Adrenalize album, and of course Retroactive was B-sides. Well, my initial thought hearing this back when it came out was just kind of indifference. Like, I listened to it a lot because I was a huge fan of Def Leppard. I would still go back to Retroactive more, even though it's a B-sides, because it was like the Def Leppard I loved, but I didn't dislike this album when it came out. I'm kind of on the opposite side of you now, where I understand completely what you're saying is like, looking back, you're 100% right. They didn't need to make this album, but looking back on it, I like it more now than I think I did at any point ever. I don't know what that really entails, but
well, and and that's fine. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe in that time period they thought, shit, we need to do something.
Yeah, because I mean, all those like
what? They're the musicians, they're the songwriters. I don't know shit. I just I make fucking airplane parts for a living. What do I know? But I mean, just it like when I listen to it, that's what I think as a fan.
The only band I think that is comparable to Def Leppard at like the level they were and like what they went through was Bon Jovi. And I feel that Bon Jovi, I just wanted to throw this in, I feel Bon Jovi handled that time period better as far as releasing an album, because they put out, I guess it was 95 though, I think, they put out These Days. And it was kind of like they're slightly shift, but it still sounded like Bon Jovi. It didn't sound like Bon Jovi trying to fit into an alternative scene. And it's still a successful album, and it's still an album that, people hold in the, I'll see people talk about it like on random on social media, and you don't ever see someone talking about Slang unless they're like extremely diehard,
right. You have a great point.
But
all this shit we've talked about, and we haven't even got to the first track.
Right.
Like, what's wrong with us?
I know. Well, let's get to that first track, because the first track is like right out the gate is like an immediate what the fuck. Like you get the fact, okay, this is different.
Well, and that was my notes. Was like, this is just too far outside of the Def Leppard realm.
Yeah,
I'm just like, no, I don't know about this.
I remember going to not trying to jump ahead, but in my mind, I remembered Work It Out being the first single. But when I looked this up, Slang was actually the first single like 2 or 3 months before the album. And I don't really remember that getting radio play around here.
That's new to me. I thought Work It Out was the first single. Since I remember them on Jay Leno and all that shit. Yeah,
like it's the song that because it's of the two songs, Work It Out got more play. It ended up charting like on mainstream rock, Billboard. Slang did not, which is kind of odd because Slang is a more classic sounding song. But like, I just remember hearing Work It Out before I got the album, and so you already kind of had an idea of what you might be getting. Still kind of held out hope that maybe it's just this one song for the radio.
Yeah.
But then once Truth started, you knew, okay, no, this is like how this album is going to be probably.
Oh, yeah.
And in this song, it has a real, obvious, like a mega 90s vibe to it, kind of like early 90s U2 or some shit. But the original... There's an original version of this on the Anniversary album, which I know we're not talking about, but it's just like a way better song. It's more interesting. It's heavier. So check that out if you have not.
Right.
But what, track 2, Turn to Dust? I just thought
Now,
that
see,
this
that's one I want to talk about.
100%, this is probably what you were going into with this chorus. The chorus of the song has a huge 80s Def Leppard chorus sound to
Yes,
it, but it's just
this
masked
is
by
just
that 90s.
it's a fun, catchy. Had they changed the technology around, it could have been a great '80s Def Leppard song. I love this song. This is a great song. So you totally know where I'm going with this.
Definitely one of the top 3 songs on this album, probably.
Absolutely.
And it's like outside of it's just kind of masked by that, like you said, that 90s, mid 90s alternative sound is what kind of kills it from being what could have been like a radio hit.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Then the third track, the title track, in my opinion, like it probably not top 10, but probably a top 15 Def Leppard song of all time. Maybe top
That
20.
was a fun song, and it was a modern song. I don't know that it was a Def Leppard song, but
Oh, for
yeah,
sure, yeah.
yeah, that was a catchy. Yeah, you got my attention with that song at least.
I wonder if like the whole album had been in that style, even though it wasn't classic Def Leppard, but it was like a kind of a funner, upbeat vibe. I wonder if like it would have resonated more, like this album would have been more
Right.
successful if like all the songs were in that kind of style of slang, you know?
I mean, you never know.
Right. But All I Want Is Everything is another one that I was kind of surprised because when you look back at like, there's another song on here that I would say this about, but like, because we talked about this way back when we had Bill Leverty from Firehouse on the podcast. When Firehouse released, was it their third album? Like came out like 95, 96 when, everything of that genre was dead.
Oh yeah,
But they still had that massive hit with I Live My Life for You, like on adult contemporary radio. And I feel like All I Want Is Everything and Breathe a Sigh from this album could have absolutely done that. And I'm surprised that like the record company didn't push it that way because All I Want Is Everything is a very typical Def Leppard ballad, especially coming off of Adrenalize with songs like Tonight.
well, I mean, if you want my opinion, to me it was just a last gasp at trying to be mainstream. Like, just admit you're a classic rock band.
Yeah.
But my notes were I really liked the solo. I really enjoyed that. I mean, that song is just it's totally skippable. Sorry.
It's a very boring song. Yeah, I'd say that. Like
Okay, well, at least you're there with me.
Yeah, I mean, I love a lot of Def Leppard ballads, and this isn't like one of the top ones, but it's just very reminiscent of that sound. Like, because I thought the song "Tonight" from Adrenalize was boring as hell, so that's why I compared it to it. But
Right.
but then we get to Work It Out, which is we kind of touched on a bit, but it honestly, to me, it sounds like this song could have been a bigger hit than it.
No, keep going. Yeah.
If it had been anyone else, like if just some random band had released this song, like I feel like it probably would have been a hit. It just kind of had that vibe from '96. It's not a bad song, but it's one of my least favorite on the album. Probably, I don't know. I don't really care. I'm kind of indifferent towards it.
Kind of like with you and Megadeth Crush 'Em. Like if it had been a different band, maybe.
Yeah, right. Well, the song "Breathe a Sigh," kind of the same thing I said about "All I Want Is Everything." It had that vibe where it could have fit on adult contemporary. That soft rock kind of vibe or whatever you want to call it. I mean, it probably actually would have worked. It's probably the song on this album that would have worked most on like Adrenalize, just basically as it is.
Yeah, I think that song is boring as shit. Like, seriously, it is. But I kind of agree. Like, they could have just kind of did that 80s thing and it would have been a perfect Def Leppard ballad.
Yeah. Well, the next track, Deliver Me, is absolutely one of my favorites on here. It's got that same, like, that 90s alt vibe that they're doing in here, but it shifts more to a darker, like, a hard rock sound, like instead of that alternative sound when it gets into the chorus, like a lot of these songs did. And it'd been interesting, to get a full album like in this direction, especially with that kind of harder edged vibe but where the verses it's the verses on this that actually I just see my note here. The verses I felt like were more powerful than the chorus actually.
Okay.
Did you have any note on this or you do not like this?
Oh, yeah. I had a lot of note on this. But I feel bad now.
Well, no, go ahead. I don't care.
This one sucked balls.
Okay.
Like it's this, it's like this '90s contrite goddamn, like, oh, I've heard this a million times in the '90s, so let me do this so I can feel relatable. Like I've heard this chord progression a million times, and it was just boring and derivative, and yeah, no, next.
I think to me
Sorry,
it just kind
not
of set
sorry.
like it just kind of like for Def Leppard at least it felt different. So maybe that's why I was like not as like harsh towards it if I would. I don't know. But
But I will tell you, the next song, "Gift of Flesh,"
oh yeah, this
is
is number one or
this
two.
song is this song is fucking fun. It's
Yeah.
fucking great, and it's what the whole goddamn record should have been.
Oh, for sure.
So that's just what I think.
Yeah. Even well, first off, title wise, I'm surprised that that title never got used before, especially in the heyday, because
Right.
it sounds like a great '80s sounding title. But guitar wise, it's definitely one of the darker songs like ever in their catalog. I think, like you said, it's super fun, but it's got this. I think the Def Leppard fans that like you kind of like you just said that didn't like this album at the time probably would really love this song if they went back just and like just listen to this song only and think, well, fuck
Oh
yeah.
yeah, absolutely, hands down.
Yeah, and the chorus too, especially was like classic Def Leppard on that one. But
Right.
what do we got next? Blood Runs Cold. This is the segue out of Gift of Flesh into this song's pretty cool because it's not typical for Def Leppard, but most of this album wasn't typical, obviously. So this song's fine, I guess, in retrospect, but there's nothing that excites me about it. The I wrote down that the guitar solo was the coolest part.
I wrote down, I fell asleep.
Okay, fair enough. Where does love go when it dies? This is another very typical adrenalized, syrupy
Mm-hmm.
ballad, like in that "All I Want Is Everything Tonight" kind of vibe. It's very boring, just like those, but the middle kind of breaks down to where it's got this more just acoustic part with Joe's voice, and that was a little bit cooler than the rest of the song. But this song just would be more interesting to me if that's just how the whole thing was like that acoustic part.
Right. Again, my notes for that was literally, I fell asleep.
Well, did the next song wake you up?
No,
Okay.
because Pearl Euphoria, my note literally was epic drone we don't need.
This was another song I liked more than most of the album. I would put it on the better half of the songs at least. And I remember when the album came out that this, besides Slang and Gift of Flesh, this was like back in the '90s the song that I would listen to off this album. Kind of the same thing if it had been a more interesting album, if like they had kind of stuck to this sound or like Gift of Flesh or whatever. But overall, it's got kind of an epic kind of closing to it, but it's not an all-time Def Leppard song by any means, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Which was the final track on the original album, and then the reissue or there's the bonus track. I don't know. Did you listen to this?
What was it called? I
Move
had
with
a
me,
note.
move with me slowly.
Move with me. Yeah, I wrote, nope, not the bluesy type. Oh, yeah, the lyric, groove on your breathing. Yeah, no, dumb. Those are my notes.
Nice. Well,
And
let's
now I'm
see.
going to delete this whole thing. So now we went through it.
To me, it definitely sounds like a B-side just because it doesn't. It's technically as a song, it's more straightforward as a song than any other song on this album.
Right.
Even the songs that are definitely better than it, but it's like there's no effects, there's no attempts to make it sound like 1996. It sounds like that it could have, fit on earlier Def Leppard albums if they wanted to, but like, I
Right.
mean, I'm not saying it's great. I'm just saying that the sound of it is the one song on this album that doesn't sound like the Slang as a whole to me. But overall, yeah, it's like most of the album, it's definitely not an all killer no filler album. It's got some stuff you don't give a shit about, but I would say overall, when I look at Slang, even though I said earlier I like it better than I did earlier on, it's still not an album I feel like I'm going to sit down and listen to straight through again unless I'm doing something like this. But there's a solid 4 or 5 songs that I definitely like for sure on this
Oh,
album.
yeah, for sure. And if you found it on vinyl, you'd be all about it.
Oh, absolutely. And
Because I probably would be too.
the album cover, like we talked about last week with Pantera, I always thought was kind of interesting because it's not
Right.
typical Def Leppard. It's the first album, probably the only album, I don't know, where they didn't use their classic logo like all bands were doing in the 90s. Metallica, half those bands were changing their logo for a minute.
You have to change the logo. It has to look 90s.
Yeah, right. And again, kind of going off what you said at the beginning of this, where you're talking about they didn't need to make this album because then, what, 3 years later, we got Euphoria, which is an amazing fucking Def Leppard
Which
album.
is
It sounds like
insane.
classic Def Leppard, like
Like
going off of
Promises,
Hysteria,
Hello.
with Promises, Demolition Man, all that great stuff.
Yeah, don't get me started.
Yeah, find us back in 2029. We can do a 30th anniversary of that album.
Right. I'm here. I'm for it.
All right. If I should throw it out there, I'll throw it out there just to like keep myself in check. But we're talking about doing this with Metallica's Load as well, and that anniversary will be next month in June. So hopefully you'll see us talking 30 years of Load, and I know we'll have a fuckload of interesting things to say about that. We've both always had.
You just let me know. I'm always down for that one.
Oh,
I don't even need to take any notes. I got them all in my head on that deal.
Every single track.
Absolutely.
All right. I'll definitely need to take some notes on a few of those tracks.
Oh, I'm sure. I don't blame you.
Appreciate you doing this. It was fun to look back at a couple of these albums that we end of our teen years, coming into our 20s, 1996.
Yeah, man. Thank you very much. That was awesome. I appreciate it.
There you go. 30 years of Def Leppard's Slang. Huge thank you there to Jason for coming back on once again to talk to me. Always fun to not only dive into, albums like this, but of course have Jason on the podcast. If you're a longtime listener of this podcast, of course you know that he used to be the co-host here with me. The original. Me and him started this together pretty much exactly 11 years ago. I didn't mention that up front, but episode about this album is dropping on May 13th. And the first episode of this podcast in 2015 was May, I didn't look up the date, it was either 16th or 17th. So a few days now will be the 11th anniversary. I'm not going to say that there's going to be anniversary celebrations happening, because I did last year for the 10th, the decade, the big one. I said there was going to be something, and then nothing ever happened. I just got busy with being out of town for work all the time and didn't make it happen. But on a personal standpoint, I've always been a bigger, this is irrelevance, but I've always been a big fan of odd numbers. So to me, an 11th anniversary is cooler than a 10th anniversary. Kind of in the style of Rush. Rush always did weird shit like that. You remember when Neil Peart was still around that long ago in history, the last tour they did, was it called, I can't remember what the name of the tour was, but I think, it was something related around the 41st anniversary. Of course, bands were doing that around the pandemic, but that was only out of necessity. But this was like just them being, Rush. That's a long-winded way to say I'm glad Jason's back. Once again, he was here last week for the most previous episode, 458. We did this same thing where we went back over Pantera's The Great Southern Trendkill. Obviously a stark difference to what Def Leppard did right here. And we spoke about that in this one and a little bit in the Pantera one, where Pantera used this moment in time to go against the grain, to do what everybody knew they were already doing, what everybody loved, but took it to a slightly extremer level. Whereas even metal bands around this time, unless they were already an extreme band, were already, were kind of trying to adapt. We're trying to make shit commercialized, because even in the, in that realm of all the alternative crap that was happening on the radio, I say crap, I liked a lot of it, but I mean in the midst of like your Smashing Pumpkins and your Green Day and all the bands that weren't heavy, real heavy, that were making waves in the mid-90s, there were still heavy bands that were getting played on the radio. Corrosion of Conformity's album Deliverance kind of broke them into the mainstream, with a couple songs getting played on the radio. We had Typo and White Zombie, of course, is another band that was getting heavy on the radio, but bands like Typo and Biohazard and Helmet and Prong and all these bands getting played heavily on MTV through Headbangers Ball. I mean, there was a good amount of metal getting attention in the 90s, just not at obviously the mainstream level that it was in the early 90s, late 80s with the thrash. But, Metallica getting so massive in the early 90s was, whether you like Metallica or not, it was a blessing because it lifted the bands around them. Megadeth had success right after that, Anthrax. All these bands had commercial success even during this period. But I'm getting way off subject here. But what I was trying to say is that Def Leppard was one of those bands that obviously just went starkly into the realm of let's just see if we can capitalize on this moment and these trends. And it, didn't really, in the grand scheme, work out for them. Like we mentioned there at the end of the interview, they put out Euphoria. A few years later, a return to form on the sound. They have this song Promises, which is, in my opinion, one of their all-time greats. Demolition Man, Paper Sun, such a great album. Def Leppard is there's always a stark difference in people's opinions, they're not a polarizing band overall, but I think when it comes to fans of hard rock, they kind of are, because a lot of people are like, oh, they were only good in the 80s, or they were only, they say the same thing they do about Metallica. Def Leppard was only good on their first 2 albums, or they were only good their first 4 albums. But I'm one of those people that have followed them throughout their career and past the 90s. They've still released several albums. They even had a single come out here just earlier in the year called Rejoice. Has a classic Def Leppard sound. Like their album X, that album, it wasn't classic Def Leppard like Euphoria, but it had classic Def Leppard sounding songs on it, and it had, several cool ones. And they had albums that were down, like Sounds from the Sparkle Lounge and on and on. But being a diehard, I got every one of those and listened to them in that time period, and there's a handful of songs on every one of these Def Leppard albums that I like. But of course, you can't beat that classic era, whether it be the new wave of British heavy metal stuff with On Through the Night and High and Dry, into the more commercialized rock that was huge, like Pyromania and Hysteria. This band is one of those bands that carved a niche for themselves and just became one of the all-time greats. Like I mentioned up front, Vivian Campbell was on this podcast several years ago, episode 226. Check that out. Vivian Campbell, of course, was in Dio and Whitesnake before he was in Def Leppard. He also has the band Last in Line that has a few albums out now. I've been fortunate enough to see them live as well a couple times. Great band. If you're not familiar with their original music, I'm sure you know that they started as a tribute to Dio. It was the original Dio lineup, minus Dio, of course. The great vocalist and Andrew Freeman, and they have put out some great albums, some great original music that you need to check out. Speaking of Whitesnake, Adrian Vandenberg was on here a couple years ago. That was quite an honor to talk to him. I've had Glenn Hughes on here 3 times, Frank Cannon of Tesla 5 times, Robin McCauley of McCauley Schenker Group, Michael Schenker Fest, Black Swan, all that great stuff 5 times. Damon Johnson of Thin Lizzy, Brother Kane, Black Star Riders, and Alice Cooper, and now Leonard Skinner has been on here 6 times. Ricky Medlock of Leonard Skinner, Vernon Reid and Corey Glover of Living Color. Dave Ellefson, if I could speak right, of Megadeth has been on here a couple times. James Lomenzo, currently of Megadeth, and John Fogerty of Black Label Society has been on here in the past, as have members of Testament, Death Angel, Creator, Accept, Saxon, Diamond Head, Motley Crue, Tesla, Great White, LA Guns, Kicks, Warrant, Firehouse, Slaughter, Twisted Sister, Queensryche, Corrosion and Conformity, Vanilla Ice, Shooter Jennings, Candlebox, Local H if you like that 90s stuff, Breaking Benjamin, Hellstorm, Skillet, Three Doors Down. Rest in peace to Brad Arnold. I had the drummer of Three Doors Down, Greg Upchurch, on here a couple years ago as well. So yeah, just dig back through all these recent episodes, like Tommy Scio from Tesla and his band Bad Marriage. Johnny Kelly of Typo Negative was just on here a few weeks ago. TheThunderUnderground.com. You can listen to everything right there. You can also listen pretty much anywhere podcasts are heard. If you're listening on Spotify or YouTube or wherever, hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Leave a review. That's a great way to help. And anytime you see a social media post, if you like, comment, or share, that's a super easy way to help out this podcast as well. Also, anytime you see one of your favorite bands or anybody with a business page, if you just like, comment, or share, that's a easy way to get that specific post like in the view of other people. All those socials, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky, Threads, X, wherever you get your social media content, give Thunder Underground a follow. There's daily content that comes out that is separate from these episodes. A massive thank you to DEB Concerts, Sunset Tattoo, Rocklahoma Bitches, and my friend Jason for coming back once again. We may be doing this again in less than a month because a very polarizing Metallica album shares its 30th anniversary here in early June as well. You can probably figure that out pretty easily. All right, until next time.
Thunder Underground, y'all.